Welcome to Beyond Analytics. This is yet another episode on the series where we talk about data and analytics and AI. Today we have Cameron with us. Cameron, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself before we start?
Yeah, thanks, Abhi. I Cameron Cloyd. I am currently a manager and head of BI at Extra Mile C Stores, which is a retail chain predominantly in the West and expansive growth in the Southeast portions of the United States. My business intelligence career and data career, if you will, started back in 2018. I've worked for a few different big Fortune 250, if you will, companies. And I've also done startups. And then I also have a small business on the side where we do moonlighting, a couple professionals and friends of mine. And my primary focus is data as a service and data as a product across, whatever company that might be.
That's interesting, and that's great that you started off with data as a service and data as a product. So when we spoke last week as well, you spoke about data service versus data product, right? And the need to find a middle ground. Do you want to talk more about it as to what do you think data services and the product is, and what's the middle ground?
Yeah. I by no means claim to be an expert or PhD in these levels, right? There's probably books on this that have very formal definitions. But you, as well as all of us know, I feel that data analytics, business intelligence, whatever adjective or description of the department you want to give it, we're typically gap fillers, right? Is we know there's technology that needs to be implemented, we know there's data that needs to be used, and to expect people who are truly doing the operations or making the decisions, it's not always readily available or even necessarily possible for their time to be able to do that. So anyway, therefore, I feel like these types of careers were born. And I've always said there's as the technology continues to rise, including the data part of it exponentially, the person or the knowledge of these system tools and how to use this data only grows so fast. So there's a big gap, right? And then therefore here we are. And I guess I do believe heavily more so, and why I use the terminology data as a service and data as a product, is I feel that the industry typically starts, or somebody's career typically starts with being a ticket taker, create dashboards, give me Excel sheets this way, do this way, right? I just need something. But there's not a long-term vision or product, right, that they're trying to go towards, or the proper data governance that they're trying to go towards. And so when you think about being in a software company, it is much more strict in terms of what we develop, why we develop it, what's that roadmap look like. And it's also number one thing, which is where I believe it's all about the customer. And I'm big on that. So for me, when I use the term data as a service, I'm thinking probably a little more broadly than what it's meant to be. But data as a service is meant to be, data should be somehow usable, consumable, and effective, whatever that means for the right person. So then data as a service, I think more concretely means, hey, we want to be able to give you data, right? More, examples like an API. That's a great example of data as a service, right? But that's getting overly technical, right? What about your internal folks who don't even know what API stands for, right? So to me, that's what I focus on when it comes to data as a service. And then data as a product, to me, is the physical, usable thing that folks are able to see, understand, and be able to execute on. Thinking again, that's where that dashboarding might come more into play. But thinking a little bit larger than that, when people use the term, and I'm not going to get in, we can get into it later, but like self-service analytics, right? That needs to be looked at as more of what is that product to meet that need. And that's where I'm big on the persona driven approach, because there's plenty of folks who need a slightly different product or suite of products to be able to self-serve themselves with that data or be able to produce that analytics. And so I look at them as really two in together that need to be there, and thoughts that need to be ahead of mind, with no matter what, the customer is the number one thing. And that's why we do it. So
That's quite interesting, and I believe you touch upon two broader aspects, right? One is when you talk about data as a service, you do talk about data democratization, right? Because when it comes to internal teams, right, making them making the data available to them either via APIs or any other tool, right? Incidentally, a couple of weeks back, I was at the Databricks and and we spoke about this last week. I was at the Databricks Data Plus AI conference, and the keynote did have this data as a service or data democratization bit that you spoke about, and that's pretty interesting, right? So, and the second aspect that you spoke about was much more persona driven. So focusing on the first one, right? When you talk about data democratization or data as a service, do you want to talk about a couple of use cases that you feel making data available as a self-service tool for, say, internal teams, right? Not, let's not go external. For internal teams help you in your roadmap or help the company in that roadmap as you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, because yeah, for folks that might be listening in, some maybe have heard about data democratization, like you were saying. When I think of data democratization, it is truly that how to allow everybody in a company have access to data, be able to use data, and effectively use that data, right? And what does that mean? And one term we kind of talked about, right, is that self-service analytics. Okay, well, what does that mean, self-service, right? What does that even look like, right? And so to bring it back to data as a service and data as a product, that's where I look at those two pieces and say, okay, these two things or these two swim lanes of thought are how I think you get a company to utilize their data across the board and also for it to be effective. And so I'll bring it to where we are currently at Extra Mile. What we're driving towards is we have a lot of great dashboarding. Okay. So what we're looking to do is to say, that's great, but in your experience too, it'd be like, that a dashboard within Power BI can be overused simply like Excel can be overused. So at Extra Mile, what we're really focusing on is how do we create products and services using for data that are persona driven. So think of it as you have folks that are, I need the answer, right? Those are great dashboarding personas. So cool, we're going to build things where you get the answer and you can drive the analytics and it can be actionable, right? Or at least that's the goal. Then you have to think about, you have folks who need a little bit more than that, right? And so we're talking about more of a hybrid approach. Like, I'm not necessarily a technical user, but I know enough, and I do know I need a little bit more to chew on because I've got certain deliverables I need to give to a customer, or I have certain answers that I'm being asked, and I feel confident I can answer them. But I really just need the data, right? But that customer again isn't going to go write SQL as an example. Okay, so you think of a hybrid approach, and there's a lot of ways to go with that. Power BI has paginated reporting. You can do things within Power Automate, as you know. You can create plenty of even .NET apps, right? That allow folks to be able to get something that's fairly structured, very driven towards a specific goal, but it gets them what they need. And then I like to think about your more technical users. They might not be the business intelligence team who's writing all the SQL and the Python, but if given enough data or enough of a platform to be able to pull that data, they can do a lot with it, right? And do larger analyses. So that's where I start thinking of more of data as a service in that realm, right? Versus data as a product, right? So hopefully that kind of explains my thought between the two descriptors. Data service is where you start being able to apply an ecosystem for somebody who's a little less technical, but can do enough and know enough to be dangerous, right? Whether that means you give them a shared instance of a database, you use, geez, Power BI has wonderful data marts now, right? That you can get folks on, or it's something that's again what we push more towards is curated extracts, right? Between either we do something, that's a new thing that we can do for you as it comes through as kind of like, hey, consultant, can you help me? Or we start building out a catalog of different exports, right? That they can also pull from, and there's a lot of ways to do that. So that's my persona driven approach. That's how I like to think of it, and that's really what we're pushing towards here at Extra Mile as well. And one thing that's important about all three of these products is the people, right? My customer needs something, and so you can build something great, but you have to make sure there's that discussion, right? So to me, data democratization is only effective, and this is my opinion, if you are willing to play coach and teacher and partner as much as great builder, right? I need to make sure I'm listening to my customer. I need to make sure that I'm onboarding them, training them, creating opportunities for them to learn because maybe they need a refresher, lunch and learns, just whatever that may be. But you have to be thinking about it from that perspective. And there's a lot of great software uh, companies that do this, right, for their products, right? So again, I think it's just there's a lot of places that need BI and data analytics, and so they put us in those gaps. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't thinking of it more like a software, like company or the way that they would do it. Because again, I work in retail, I work in C stores, right? That's not necessarily the way people think. But I think it's important that we start to adopt those characteristics to be more effective in what we do for data as a product and data as a service. So
That's quite interesting, right? And you touch upon quite a lot of factors, and let me kind of try to combine that into just one umbrella question. So I think so. You spoke about persona. You spoke about data as in spreadsheets, dashboards getting overused, which again is one major problem that
yeah,
I believe where there is a disconnect between data teams as well as the business
sure, yeah.
consumers. Typically, I feel that data teams try to oversell, if that is the right word, uh, when it comes to metrics. And then you talk about some sort of an opinionated driven analogy where you say, okay, I need an answer, and and you start with that basic question and then build either the service or product on top of it, right? And then finally, it all boils down to what you define as an actionable insight is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I feel
Yeah, and that
that,
definition is tricky, right? Because I
right,
agree. I think actionable
exactly.
insights is like, okay, what truly makes it actionable?
Exactly right, and I've been trying to answer this question myself for the past year or a year or two as to what is that makes a plain insight an actionable insight, right? And it's all driven, right? Who's consuming it, your persona, the business context, etc. So what do you feel makes an insight an actionable insight?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. I think actionable insights are the ones that are best defined and built with the end user in mind, with the company in mind, right? And making sure that we all truly understand our North Star. And so part of I think that's valuable for this, for anybody listening is the thought of descriptive analytics, right? There's descriptive, there's predictive, and then there's prescriptive. And a lot of times I would say prescriptive is kind of the end all be all for actionable, but doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be truly prescribing the solution in your data, right, to create something actionable. But that would be in reality kind of where you want to go. So for example, I was actually just talking with somebody on my team the other day about this, right? So everybody starts out with descriptive analytics. We'll call it phase one, right? It's the, I know how many, total dollars, right? Or total units, total transactions, right? And those are great things to know. But if we think about it, what does that tell me, right? And how is the business looking at those specific, we'll call them metrics, right? That allow them to know what they need to know. So I've always said, if you're not doing some kind of arithmetic, if you're not doing two forms of arithmetic, you're not creating a KPI. So like a great example is, I always say you should be taking total, for example, sales divided by total transactions, right? To get a total sales per per basket, we'll call it, right? Okay, that's two forms of arithmetic. Now all of a sudden I have something that allows me to have a KPI, right? But KPIs are only so valuable until you have something to benchmark against. Now we're getting into what descriptive analytics really is, and arguably that benchmark is what can start to take actionable analytics, right? Or actionable insights. Okay, I see something. I've developed this with the company in mind. This is what we look at as a North Star. And that benchmark is so important to be able to say, are we where we need to be or are we not, right? Do I even need to take action on something or not, or call something out for being great? I think it's those are the key things. As long as you are doing two forms of arithmetic, as long as you have a true benchmark that's been decided upon, right? Not within a silo, but truly this is what we're looking at. It makes it a lot easier to understand truly what needs action and what doesn't. And then I think that's where predictive analytics and as well as really getting into that prescriptive analytics is truly just the more maturity within your data teams that to get in and understand the business, how much you're linking up with the particular people at the business, right? Listening in on calls, listening to how the business talks about the business, right? Or even the industry, getting on industry calls, I always think is really important, because then that allows you to take it a step further where you start using more complex calculations to do the predictive stuff, right? All the fun that everybody keeps talking about, right? How does AI actually help us out with all of this? But then I've always said the prescriptive really just comes down to how much do you understand the business, and then can you codify those decisions that need to be made, or those things that, those options or that decision tree. And that's fairly complex. I would say, after saying all of that, how much are people really focusing on just that North Star approach of, again, two pieces of arithmetic, creates a great KPI, create a good benchmark, and I think people would be way more off to the races if they felt like they could define that and keep that as, the first piece of having descriptive, actionable insights, if that makes sense.
That's quite interesting, right? And that's why I feel that once you have that story behind the KPI, typically I try to call it a story behind the KPI, which involves a lot of other things, right? It involves your descriptive phase, it involves your prescriptive part of the KPI and the predictive part of the KPI, all combined together into one cohesive story for that KPI.
Yeah, because to your point, because you're right. Like, okay, so now we have this. How do we tell a story out of it? And that's where I've always said that's kind of the beauty of you have these dashboards that kind of bring you along for the journey, maybe intraday, intra-week, but then eventually that's where I feel that great analysts can take that and develop the story that resonates and can be spoken to, right? To bring people on the journey. So I like that, right? And again, I think it's, to your point, just about how much our folks are latched in and locked in and understanding the business and also interacting with the business, to be able to make those insights more meaningful and to tell that story. Yeah, I like that.
That's true, and that's where you always feel that it makes a difference between good and great data teams, is when
Yeah.
there is that gap, this gap between them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
You touch upon a great question, right, about AI.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you feel, right, with with these advancements that AI has seen, right? I mean, there is
Yeah.
again a great question that I ask myself: what is AI and what is not, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
do you do the math? Is that AI? Those models have been there maybe 30, 50 years. And do
It's
you
a great
still call
point.
them as an AI aspect? I feel probably yes, they were always called AI. It's just that it's become a buzzword now. But what do you
Mm-hmm.
feel, right? I mean, with the advancements in AI, you feel uh, this has become easy, or it has opened a new Pandora's box where now there is a different sort of bombardment to the consumer, which you don't want to
Mm.
happen.
Yeah, to unpack this one and also not get myself in trouble. No, I'm kidding. So I say that because I am probably a late adopter to these types of things. And what I mean by that is maybe more late adoption to the big speak around it, right? I think you made an excellent point. A lot of what we're talking about that AI or machine learning is doing, it's math that's been around for a very long time. This isn't necessarily anything new. I think more than anything, what's gone on is you've had advancements in computing power. Obviously, the cloud and those things are making it so much easier for folks to be able to do some things that need a lot of power behind them. But I don't necessarily have all the money in the world to go, buy up the machine and put it together, if that makes sense. So I think there's a hardware element to this. I think there's just the ability to apply the math and more of a coding experience, right? Obviously, as you and I both know, scripting and coding and languages are just, are just unpacking themselves and continuing to evolve so quickly and so fast. And so I think there's a bit of a fad kind of around it from a big, well, maybe not a fad, but more big speak around it without truly understanding what it's doing. So in my opinion, again, let's bring it to, and I'll just try and keep it to AI specifically. When I think of AI, right, and of course you have your um, OpenAI, you have Copilot now, you have Gemini, you have a slew of AIs that everybody talks about, which is really just an awesome, well built program with an awesome, we'll call it operating system. This is kind of my simile I give to GPT-5, that understands language, right? So has wonderful uh, natural language processing, right? To give it this feel of I can interact with it and not have to sit there and code and type, right? Your voice, it interprets as code, and then it understands what you said and it gives it back to you in code, but then puts this wonderful language model on top of it. So you feel like you're talking to somebody, personally, or getting ideas and the creativity. But that's really just no different than what we used to do, where we used to type things to Google, or we used to code in zeros and ones back in the day. It's that. It's just the interaction is changing, and the compute power is amazing, and the applications that are working on behind the scenes that you don't necessarily see to generate an awesome image. That's what's going on here. There's so much to unpack, and but again, remembering that it is a computer, it is something that has limitations. So back to your question of like, what does this do for us? I think that AI is a wonderful thing to take what used to probably be is still complex work, and because it is complex, it's just maybe you're not the one having to do all of the scripting, right? It's like any tool, whether you're in the trades, right? You buy a great tool to hopefully speed up your process, right? Instead of me having to like dig a hole using a post hole digger, I've actually now have something that is battery operated or gas operated that digs it for me, right? That to me is what AI is. It's this awesome thing. If you know how to use it, it's going to be able to push complex work faster. It's going to be able to help bounce ideas off and just be able to make things happen more seamlessly, having to put a little less effort, but also being able to get to production a little bit faster. What I don't think it's going to do is it all of a sudden allows end users who are not technical to all of a sudden be able to build really wonderful technical things without, again, they have to go through the coaching and the research. Why is it doing it this? Why did you script it this? Can they figure out what it did wrong? Because it will be wrong. There's plenty of things it'll give you at first that are wrong. And then even especially with your data, which is where I think AI, people typically kind of put AI in our data lab and say, hey, yeah, put AI on top of your data. And now it can give me the insights that I want. I'll speak to it and I'll be able to type a question to it. And it'll be able to give me the answer and those actionable insights. Yeah, maybe, right? And I think it'll get better, but it also starts with good old, how well are you building out your databases? How well are your views and stored procedures, right? All of those basics, all that database management and database building and data engineering has to still be foundational. You still have to be able to truly understand what your North Star as a company. So I always say, get back to the basics, make sure those foundational layers are there. AI is something you put on top of it once you eventually feel like you have those great foundational basics. And it can create some really cool stuff, right? How much is it going to drive things forward and truly change something in my industry and the C-store chain? I think it has its opportunities, but I think, again, let's make sure we separate what's big speak versus what it truly is and what it can do.
That's quite interesting, right? And that's where I, from my perspective, try to look at it in a bit of a different way, in a bit of a different analogy, I would say, right? When you talk about AI trying to be that magic bullet where you just say that, okay, put AI on top of your data and start asking questions. And I was at the AI Summit, last year's AI Summit 2024, and this was a theme that was brewing in that summit where probably around 70 to 80% of the booths that were presenting at that summit had the same solution, that they just the prompt and he said, okay, just put in your data and start asking questions. And that's where I feel your the middle ground analogy that you have, wherein you need to understand what your data is about and you need to understand who's consuming it, which persona is consuming it, and then you need to understand what your business is.
That's right. That's a great point.
These kind of completely, I would say, radicalized approach of asking questions, what I feel these tools were missing. and you kept it at the very middle ground analogy, which works perfectly over here. Is
Yeah.
what I feel.
Yeah, and I don't know what your experience is with it, but I've also found that the AI components are awesome in my opinion, to help automate and streamline productivities, right? Like I've messed around quite a bit with Copilot and ChatGPT. There's a lot of just everyday productivities that it can do that are really amazing, right? And that I think is one of those things. Like when I think about where AI is going to be most useful for the majority of companies. Again, I think I should also state that, and I'm sure you kind of feel this way, right? Depending on what the company is and how technical they are, right? I would say most companies are going to not get as much out of AI as they'd like if they're not preparing themselves, properly, like you just said, right? And truly understand where they're at. But I found that AI is awesome for, like we said, scripting and coding, helping the engineer with creativity and new ideas. Awesome for marketing and image generating, post creation for influencers. I mean, I think there's a lot of really cool things that AI is able to do. It's kind of like, hey, the one thing I'm not great at, it can help me do a lot better, right? And then also building those types of things into a process, right? Whether it be some kind of data mining thing that you need to do daily, or some kind of just, hey, kind of generally, where is this file at, or troubleshooting. But like, everybody use it to gain insights from. Yeah, I think that's a little bit more of the big speak, because again, that resonates and I think that sells. But truly understanding what it means to get there, I think is, yeah, like what you said. That's where maybe I sit on the middle ground of it, right? I think there's a lot to be had there, and I think there's a lot of great foundational things that people can still do and see a lot of value.
That's true, actually, right? That's absolutely true. And that's where I feel as a company or as a leader, you need to understand what AI is good at. You spoke about natural language ability, right? I
Mm.
believe that's one area where
Oh
AI
yeah.
has excelled completely. Now, everyone treating it as a magic bullet to generate insights, that's where it comes into that gray area, and that's where you start getting into those um, confused mindset of whether to use it or not. And then again, right, a good question is, what do you call an AI, right? I was having one episode with a person in climate tech and analytics in climate, and that person said, like, I mean, if as an industry, if you're passing off a linear regression as an AI tool, then probably,
Yeah.
yeah, then it's AI everything.
AI is everything. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Then that, yeah. Well, and just like what you said, that to me is a perfect example of where I've seen it, where it is, we're talking about math that's been around for a very long time. We're talking about concepts that to the average person maybe have heard, maybe recall, right? Maybe they took a course one time, right? I get it. It's not that wouldn't be something. But again, what really is AI, and what is it used for, and what's it built off of, just like you said. I think there's a lot to be had. Still not quite there, right? To call it truly this thing that learns and understands and can make be that magic bullet, right? I think there's still a lot to be had. But I think it, yeah, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. I think it's going to evolve, obviously, a ton over the next decade, and it's going to be so different from where it is now to where it will be. And it will be able to do some what we would consider magic, right? To some, right? Again, sometimes magic's just not understanding something, but at the same time, it's going to kind of feel and look like that. It's going to be able to do some really, really neat things. I think it's going to create a lot of efficiencies.
It will, and it all boils down to, again, right? You spoke a great use case about coding, scripting, right? Yes, I mean, if I had to write a piece of code, maybe say 4 years back, without Cloud Code, without OpenAI, without any of the AI tools, probably it
Mm-hmm.
might take a month, as
Yep,
opposed to a week that it might take today. But it
I
also
completely
opens
agree.
one, and this is what I've seen in our teams as well, right? Our teams, they use AI as a great enabler, but again, I feel that we have to take it with a pinch of salt, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
that before AI, coding skills were prime. After AI, I feel debugging skills are prime, and
Yes,
debugging skills are
oh,
not
I love
easy
that.
to get.
Yeah, that's so true.
And debugging skills are not easy. And this is what we do as a part of the interview process as well, right? As we give them some sort of a code to debug,
Hmm.
uh, just to see if they understand someone else's written code, because that I feel will gain more dominance as
Yeah.
and when AI starts churning out more and more code, which it will.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And yeah, even for me, one of the things to make sure I level set myself with AI, and I try to push onto my teams is it's going to build something that's great. Make sure you're asking it questions of why, right? Start like go back and read and understand, okay, why this, and do you truly understand it, right? The comprehension. No, no, to me it's no different than you read a page in a book. Do you understand what you read, right? That concept should be there. And what's cool is that this is where I feel like AI is underused, is that, right? Explain to me why, right? Well, why not this? Challenge it. And what's cool about that is you can start to see different ways. I mean, you and I came up, I'm sure, in a time where we were coding and this wasn't even an option, right? You might Google some things, or the engineer next to you has been doing it a long time and memorized a book back in the day, right? So we learned, and so seeing new things or how to do different things wasn't, it was something you had to be in office and you had to, you know, sit and talk and discuss and whatever. Well, now you have a tool that you can sit and discuss that and see different ways and ask questions, but you have to know how to use it, and you have to be able to push those limits, right? And just know, like any tool, how to use the tool effectively versus just trying to let it do its thing. And you know that's the worst, when somebody just over trusts it, for example.
That is true, right? I mean, for us, probably Stack Overflow was our AI back then.
Yeah,
It's sad to see that it is going through a very painful downfall, but
it's exactly. Oh gosh, the amount of hours on, I mean,
exactly.
just days on Stack Overflow trying to figure something out. And that was part of the trade that I feel like I really enjoyed, right? I always made the analogy that the BI and data analytics world is kind of the tradesman of the white collar world, meaning, we're sitting around trying to create something. Like, we're given a task, we give it a quote, right? Whether it truly had a quote to it or not, but like we give it a quote, we give it a concept, and then we go to work. And then the idea is that we get something done pretty quickly, right? And here you go. And it was that build, and that, we're not software engineers, right? We're just trying to make something happen, and we know that there's a way, and we know things enough, we know enough to be dangerous. Yeah, where, to your point, that used to take a month. Now AI can maybe take that down to a week, and do it really well, right? If you know how to, if you're using the tool right. Yeah.
That's true. That's pretty interesting, and curious as well to see what will happen next
Yeah.
in this field, right?
Yeah. So true.
Right. That's great. It was great talking to you, Cameron.
Yeah.
Thanks a
Thank
lot
you.
for coming as a guest on this podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for
Thanks.
having me.
Yep. Great.
See you.